Hello and welcome to High Point Music Ski Reviews. I'm Lewis. In today's episode I've got something I've been really excited to try to show you. It's the Strymon Volante magnetic echo machine. So the Volante is designed to reproduce the classic sounds of the very first delay units ever used in the Binson Echo Rec, which is a magnetized piece of wire, a continuous loop that you could record onto and then play back from to create our repeats, or a tape echo, very much in a similar fashion to the piece of wire, except of course you're using an analog tape to record and then play that repeat off of. Now usually you would then erase that tape before it comes back to record again, and that allows you to get the difference between something that sounds like a looped set of chords playing back infinitely to the sound of a repeat, two repeats, or some repeats with a little bit of feedback blended in. But that's the basic idea. So if you imagine a continuous loop going around and around and around, and you record something here and it comes up and it plays here, and then it comes back over here and gets erased and comes back to the start again, ready to be recorded again. That's the general idea of both of those styles of magnetic echo machines. Now, this particular machine and a lot of tape echoes have multiple points at which you can play your repeat back from, your recorded note from. This has up to 4 that you can do that with, and it also allows you to feed each one of those playback heads, which is only one repeat, into the input stage again and give you that decaying repeats. So it's almost like a guitar feeding back. You have your sound come in, comes out, and then all the way back in and around and around and around, and that's how you get that decaying sound of repeats. You can choose a few different options in how you manipulate those controls on this particular pedal, which I'll get into when we talk about those particular parts. But for anybody like me that haven't used very many tape machines, I've used a couple of Japanese models, but nothing like the Space Echo or the Binson models. I was very impressed to have those functions available to use on a pedal. So the 3 styles of delay we get are the drum echo, which is the Binson Echo Rec, many people would know as the magnetic wire, and then we have 2 different tape delays, a Space Echo style delay and a more studio quality, higher frequency response version of the tape delay as well. So I think the best thing to do is to move on, of course, make some noise so that you can see exactly how the controls manipulate what the sound is doing. Very quickly, I'm playing my Fender Stratocaster. This is my bridge pickup. My neck. And today I'm running straight into our 2 notes clean, and I've got the Volante in the effects loop. Now I've done that so that I can have the most reverb style sound, and I've seen a lot of people run actual Space Echoes and Binsons in their effects loops. So I've gone that way for now because it allows me to use my distortion and get the most a vintage or classic sound out of the pedal. You certainly can run it straight into the front of the amplifier. I was testing the pedal like that last night. It sounded amazing. You will have some different dynamics to work with as you have gain before the pedal or after the pedal, but that's something you can experience with, and let's face it, it's most of the fun of playing with pedals. So make sure you try it both ways for yourself and see what you like the most. So the most common controls that we're going to find on the top of a delay are something to affect how quickly our repeats play back, the volume of those repeats, and the number of repeats. So that gives us how many times we hear the repeat, at what volume it comes out at, and how quickly those repeats occur. You would find this on a lot of pedals. Many of you will be familiar with a delay pedal like this. It actually has those controls on the front panel, although they're labeled a little bit differently. And even delay pedals like the Boss DD7 have those very similar functions. So on the Volante, we've got our time control. very slow. So you can hear as we turn it clockwise, the repeats get slower. The next control though we've got on here is the number of repeats. So if we turn that down like so, you get 1. You get 1 and the others are a little bit quieter. Let's go up to say 11 o'clock. You can hear more of those repeats now. Higher. And then if we turn it all the way up, you'll hear them start to self-oscillate. Of course, the third control is a volume control, so it allows us to manipulate exactly how loud those repeats are. We'll start with it turned all the way up. You can hear that first repeat comes through. It's actually louder than my guitar playing. Back to about 2. At 10. And then back to only 1 repeat. So a very useful control. The volume of which that's playing back at, when you manipulate that, it'll allow you to play more complicated lines, or if you're doing a lot more noise, you maybe don't want that delay coming back over the top of what you're doing. But of course, if you do, it's certainly got the range to do so. So very, very simple set of controls, very common across many delay pedals. And once you understand those 3, it starts to make the Volante a little bit less daunting to learn how to use. I know once I worked that out, I was like, oh, that's great. And I was able to then start manipulating the things I wasn't used to, because I realized that I already understand how to use them from my experience with other pedals. Next up, I'm going to look at our tone controls. The tone controls here, we've got our record level, a low cut, and a wear. Now I'm grouping these together like this because they affect the sound coming out, the repeats coming out, and they manipulate the quality of that sound. So the first up is the record level. Now the record level is actually a transistor-based preamp inside the pedal, and it emulates the tube circuitry or the input stage circuitry very commonly found in the more vintage models that the Volante is based on, and it allows us to turn the volume up into the record section of the pedal. So this allows us to get a distorted repeat in the pedal, allowing our clean original signal to stay pristine. So to make that easier to hear, I'm going to turn that all the way up like so, and you'll hear how distorted it is. You can hear that distortion sound in the background. A very cool way to manipulate your tone there. Now, if you wanted to make that really, really clean, you can turn your input signal down. All the way anti-clockwise will allow no signal coming through, or very little, I should say. But at about that 9 o'clock, even 10, you're getting a fairly clean sound into the record stage of what the pedal is doing. So a little bit of a distorted sound is a really great way to manipulate that tone, hide the delay signal, or allow the delay signal to have good contrast against your clean tone of your guitar. The next up is our low cut. So this is a bass control, and as we turn it clockwise, it will scoop bass frequencies out. Another really good way to reduce the muddiness of your sound. If you're playing a lot of down tuning and you want to keep it really, really tight, or you're playing just low chords, this is a good function to be getting used to. So we'll start with it off. Half. And full cut. Try my neck pickup as well. Back again. And then clean again. Like so. The next tone control I mentioned was the wear. Now this knob affects the quality of the proverbial tape in the machine. Like valves, like records, like VHS machines, the tape does degrade, and the more times it runs through the machine, the older it gets, the more times it's magnetized and demagnetized in the recording process. That quality of what that tape can do will become less and less. You'll lose top end response. Now this is a function of the Strymon timeline that one of the selling functions for me. One of the reasons I bought the timeline was the ability for you to manipulate the tone control with a function like this. So I was really happy to see it on the Volante. Let's check out what it does to our top end frequency response. So particularly on that tape setting, it's really easy to hear that your top end response drops off and kind of makes it a little bit less bright. Another good way to manipulate your delay sound so that it sits behind your original clean guitar sound, and being able to change that just by moving a knob rather than having to replace tape that you would have to do on a real machine, or I don't know how you would service a Binson Echo Rec. They're fairly rare, but that's a great function. It allows you to manipulate your tone control from your bass, your treble, how much distortion is occurring, and then of course our time, our repeats, and our volume from there. So now let's get on with the controls that are more specific to a magnetic echo machine. So we're going to go to the mechanics knob to start with. Now this knob is responsible for controlling the glitchiness or the mechanical movement in the tape machine. Now as it jams and maybe the reels don't move perfectly in time, it's going to pull that tape through the machine at different rates and affect the tone controls that you get through there. So a good way I think to explain this is that it almost can add a modulated sound. Because you're affecting the mechanical qualities of the machine itself, its physical workings, you're able to make these modulations because it affects the pitch, because it's controlling the speed of your sound. So let's check it out and see what it can do. Now as we turn that up, so we'll just push that up to 12 o'clock now. Well, it's getting a little bit there. We'll go forward to about that 2 o'clock. You can hear that pitch modulation coming into it. We'll go all the way up. It'll get pretty wobbly. I might just move that a little bit louder for you as well. Now you can hear that you're getting that chorusy kind of effect going on. So I really like the way they've integrated this mechanic control. It is a control that I use on the tape, the D-tape function of the Strymon timeline. It's a great way to add some modulation in, and by adding that little bit of warble and pitch manipulation to your repeats, it can help to make your guitar playing sound more organic and allow a little bit more movement, a little bit of spaciousness to help keep a good contrast between your clean and hopefully in tune guitar and what the tape echo or the magnetic echo is producing as far as your repeated sounds go. So the next controls we have to deal with are probably the more complicated to understand. It certainly took me a little bit to get my head around it. We've got our playback and our feedback heads. So I mentioned this earlier. We were talking about the difference between the record and the playback point. So I'm just going to start turning them on one by one to show you what I mean, and hopefully that'll help to explain how you can approach adding those extra heads in, and then we can talk about the spacing. So first of all, the number 4 here, the playback head 4, is our quarter note repeat. Sounds like this. Okay. Like so. So a great way to think and approach how to use your playback heads. Imagine our tape is traveling along this path. We're going to come along, we're going to record it up here, and then it's going to pass this head, it's going to pass head 2, it's going to pass head 3, and it's going to get to head 4, which is turned on, and it's going to play. Now what happens is, if we turn on head number 3, it's going to add a dotted 8th note in. Now what this does is it just comes in a little bit before our quarter note, right? So you can hear that bump, but up. We can of course turn 4 off. and just get 3. But for the purposes of understanding where they fit into the grand scheme of things, let's leave it like that. We then go to our normal 8th note, tape head number 2. So a little bit of a gap because we don't have number 1 on yet. Sounds pretty cool with lead work. You probably want to be a little more careful using rhythm work because obviously it's going to need to be played in time with your guitar work if it's really, really predominant. If it's sitting a little bit in the background, you can be a bit freer with it, but of course that's going to be up to your own experimentation. Let's add tape head number 1 in, which is our 16th note. So you can hear my original playing, the 16th, the 8th, the dotted 8th, and then the quartered note. And that's how we get that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like so. If I slow that down, so again you're hearing my first strum and then only the playback heads coming in. So that's our 4 tape heads. Now what we can do with the spacing control is we can change, if you imagine those 4 tape heads like this, we can manipulate how they sit. So we can go to triplets, where they move the tape heads together to create a triplet sound. We can go to the golden ratio, which is a more of an uneven sound. And then we go to a silver ratio, which stacks all of the tape heads close together right at the end. So you get our first play, a bit of a gap, and then all 4. So I'll just sweep through that, that spacing knob to make that a bit easier at that slower tempo on the, or slower time rather, on that knob there. That's a cool sound, isn't it? One little straggler at the end. All the way to the end. And you can hear that gap increasing as we move those heads around. So on the actual tape machine, you could slide these playback heads along a little mechanical section of the machine to manipulate the spacing between the notes. And it just gives you another way to create other rhythmic devices with your delays. You don't have to run all of your tape heads, of course. Go back to that triplet one, that sounded pretty cool. So before I start adding in our feedback heads, I'm going to just quickly show you the difference in the speed control. Now what the speed control does is it changes at what speed the proverbial tape is traveling through the machine. So you can use the speed control to increase your delay time or to decrease your delay time. Now the thing you have to remember is as that tape passes through the machine at a higher speed, you don't necessarily hear as many of the artifacts, the noises, the glitches, the little bits of warbly sound. Because it's playing much faster, they're a little bit harder to hear. In the normal position, it's our standard sound, and that would be a good place to start. But you can then go to the half speed, which slows the tape playback down, increasing your delay time and allowing the eccentricities of your sound to be more audible. It's going to be a little bit easier just to show you what that does. So I'm going to start off in normal, I'll double it, and then we'll go to half. Now, of course, if you manipulate that speed control while you're playing, you can get some pretty cool sounds. I will show you a little bit of that in a moment when I add these feedback heads in. But basically, that gives us the ability to manipulate the time along with the time control here to get different sounds from the pedal that also affect the tone, how much of this wear we hear, this mechanic flutter, and the wear of the tape. That speed is going to be a big part of that. And you can get some pretty cool half-time, double-time sounds if you do that while you're playing. So let's just put one repeat head in. I'm going to start with our quarter note repeat. So what this is going to do, our tape is going to come along. We're going to go 1 repeat, 2 repeats, 3 repeats, It's going to hit our quarter repeat, and then it's also going to send that repeat out of the feedback all the way back to the start into the input stage and pass through again until our repeats control here determine it should finish. So this sound is going to be more like what you would be used to hearing in something like a Boss DM3 or a DD7 a digital delay. So just for the purposes of simplifying, I'm only going to show you those tape head 4 and the feedback. So let's have a listen to the tape head number 4 with the feedback running back in. And now we're getting a more traditional delay sound. I'm going to add some more of those repeats in to make that a bit more obvious, to show you that change in speed. We'll go back to the normal. You can hear that increase in pitch. So a very cool function. It's not quite that easy to manipulate the speed control with your finger on the top of the pedal, but if you were using something like the Strymon multi-switch, which is an auxiliary foot switch that you can plug into this to get more access to some of those functions, that is actually something you can control on the fly, and it would give you the ability to create some really cool glitchy sounds. Let's add some of these other tape heads back in and show you how that sounds there. And that gets us to the end of those 4 feedback controls. You don't actually need to have the playback head on to hear that feedback. So a cool thing I found is you can turn those off, leave our quarter note on, but allow all of those 4 heads to create that feedback and come through as those delayed repeats rather than the stronger single playbacks. So you can hear those multi-rhythms coming through, but we don't have that really dominant playback repeat overpowering the rest of the sound. So this is going to be more of an ambient kind of sound. By manipulating those feedback heads without the playback heads, you can get some really beautiful complex rhythmic tones coming through that you can then of course manipulate with your low cut and the wear and the mechanical sound of the repeats, along with the volume and times and things. So a really cool way to go from a really dominant, bright, obvious delay sound to a more spacious, atmospheric kind of sound. So the very last control that I haven't spoken about, and maybe I should have done at the start, but because the knobs all work fairly similarly, I thought it was good to leave for now. We've actually got the type of delay. So I've been using it in the tape, the middle position, for the last little bit to show you those obvious tonal manipulations, but you can actually do quite a bit of tonal manipulation here as well. So the drum echo has not as good a bottom end response and not as good treble response. It's more of a MIDI kind of sound. You can hear it gets a little bit honky in those repeats. We go back to our tape. And then to the studio, the higher quality of the 3. And you can hear that frequency range increasing. So I'll just play a little bit and not talk in between and switch back and forth between those. I am now also going to turn the mechanics knob down so you get a better idea of the cleaner response, and then I'll turn them up so you get a better idea of the dirty response. So now I'm going to manipulate the quality of those at the other end, the dirtier of the sounds. I'm going to put down my mechanics at about that halfway point for just a little bit of modulation. And I'm going to turn our wear on the tape all the way up as well, so you can hear the other range. So starting on the drum, the lowest of the quality repeats. You can hear there's not much frequency response left there. Tape. And up at the studio. And you can definitely hear there's a lot more top end there, even though we've got our wear turned all the way up. Let's go through that at half. So you can hear that modulation occurring. It is nice to have that in there, but it's a really great way just to jump between a few different fidelities of sound by flicking that type switch on its own. And very lucky last, a really cool feature I've found when playing around with it last night is you can actually manipulate the volume of each playback head. So rather than changing one knob to control the overall master volume of your repeats, you can actually halve the volume of each playback head in order to make them less or more obvious. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn those on and take our feedback off so it's a little bit easier to hear. And then all you need to do to be able to change that setting, let's hear it while it's all at full volume. So in order to manipulate that volume, all you need to do is hold that button down and it'll change from a green to an orange LED. Let's do a 2, 3. You can hear that pattern or that rhythmic sort of sound coming through there just by manipulating the volume of those playbacks. And once you start adding those other feedback controls in, they're going to feed back, but they're going to feed back at half the volume because you're only feeding half of the playback head into that feedback path that's going to start playing again. So a really, really cool way to get, not a tremolo sound per se, but a way to manipulate that rhythmic response of the delay patterns even further than just turning the heads on and off and controlling the spacing. So that's my run through on the Volante. Stick around for another video where I'm going to get Ryan in and we're going to go through some of the sounds. There'll be a lot more playing and a lot less talking, so that might be more enjoyable for those who like to listen to guitar playing rather than look at pictures of pedals like this one. But that'll come up very shortly. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you give us a like, a share, and subscribe to our social media. You can also become one of our esteemed Patreon members and help to support the channel in putting out as much good quality content as frequently as possible. And stay tuned for the next videos. Thank you very much. I'll see you then.